All right, welcome to The Explainer. So this week, we're diving into a really provocative idea, one that claims it has a single, pretty simple fix for one of the biggest, most complicated problems in the world today.
Yeah, it's a question you hear all the time, right? From Europe to East Asia, developed countries are seeing their populations shrink. And governments, well, they're throwing billions of dollars at the problem, but nothing really seems to be working. So what if all that conventional wisdom is just completely off base?
So the source we're looking at for this explainer comes from a blog called The Appalachian Gorilla. And its whole point, its central argument, is that the real solution isn't just radical. It's been hiding in plain sight this entire time.
Okay, so the first thing this post does is build its case by looking at a bunch of really high-profile failures. It basically asks, why do even the most expensive government programs seem to totally miss the mark?
Okay, let's take a look at Romania back in the 1960s. The government did something really drastic. They banned abortion and birth control. And what happened? Well, you see this immediate, massive spike in births. But, and this is the key part, it didn't stick. The rate just completely collapsed over the next couple of decades, ending up right back where it started. So the blog uses this as like Exhibit A. You can't just force this stuff. It doesn't create lasting change.
Or, hey, let's look at Hungary. According to the source, the country has poured a staggering 5% of its entire GDP into policies meant to boost families.
And after all that spending, what was the result? Well, after a tiny little bump, the birth rate actually dropped below where it was when they started. The conclusion the author draws here is pretty clear. Money by itself just isn't the answer.
But probably the most extreme example the post brings up is South Korea. I mean, even with huge amounts of state support, its fertility rate has just cratered to 0.75 children per woman. Just to put that in perspective, you need 2.1 just to keep the population stable.
And how the blog post describes this number, well, it's brutally blunt. It calls this, and I'm quoting here, "You may not be a country for much longer" types of low. I mean, that's a really stark warning about the kind of demographic cliff these numbers are pointing to.
So, okay, if all these big, top-down government programs are failing, where do we actually find success? This is where the argument pivots, and it asks us to look at two really surprising outliers right here in the West, where birth rates are, well, they're booming.
So, this slide gets to the core of the blog's evidence. On one side, you have the Amish. On the other, Hasidic Jews. And according to this source, both groups have these absolutely staggering birth rates. We're talking 6 to 7 children per woman. I mean, they are complete outliers in the modern Western world. So the big question is, what on earth do they have in common?
So, looking at the Amish first, the post points out a few things. Super high religiosity, an agrarian lifestyle, and this incredibly powerful community support. But the argument really zooms in on one specific idea that it says is the most important piece of the puzzle, a concept it calls male stability. Okay, now let's look at the Hasidic community. And the list? It's strikingly similar. High religiosity, really strong community support, and there it is again, that same element of male stability. In this case, the blog notes that it's often supported by government subsidies for men to study religion, which is unconventional for sure, but it creates a stable foundation. You see the pattern here? That's the key.
All right, so we've seen the failures, we've seen the successes. Now the blog post pulls it all together into one single unifying theory.
So what is it? What's the one common thread that connects these two very different, very successful communities? And what separates them from the rest of the declining modern world?
And here it is. This is the big idea the entire argument is built on: male stability. So what does the blog mean by that? It's defined as a man's security, his security in his home, in his job, and in his community. The central claim here is that this stability is the essential ingredient, the precondition for starting a family. It creates that reliable foundation that a family can actually be built on. And that brings us to the final and definitely the most radical part of this whole argument. If the problem is a lack of male stability, well, then the solution has to be to create it directly. And the fix they propose is, wow, it is shockingly direct. Okay, step 1, give every man a house when he turns 18. Step 2, you make it legally impossible for that house to ever be sold or lost. Not in bankruptcy, not in a divorce, it is his, permanently. And the result, according to the blog, is instant male stability. It's the bedrock on which new families can be built. A single policy that's meant to solve the whole thing. And the blog doesn't just stop there. It claims this one single policy would set off this whole chain reaction of benefits. It would reduce financial stress on families, it would get rid of what it calls perverse incentives for divorce, and it would just let healthier, low-debt communities grow on their own. Huge claims. And that's the argument. It's a really clear line of logic, right? Modern solutions are failing. These traditional communities are thriving. The common link is this idea of male stability, and so the fix is a free, permanent house for every man. It's a powerful, super provocative story, and it leaves us with this one critical question. Can the solution to one of the most complex problems of our time really be that simple? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for The Explainer.